This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman.
This is Lauren Lester, the voice of Robin and Nightwing.
And you're listening to the DCAU Review.
Hosted by Cal and Liam.
Streaming at DCAUreview.com.
And on your favorite podcast app.
Gotham City is out of control.
An entire city screaming in fear.
Supervillains walk the streets, preying on the innocent.
They will learn the true nature of power.
The police are powerless. A creature prowls this urban wasteland.
What is that?
He moves in darkness. For some, he is a rumor, a name whispered in the corridors of the underworld, waiting for the chance to strike. Let every criminal know the acid taste of fear.
You crazy! Bat! Giant bat!
Gotham has forgotten what justice means. The Dark Knight is here to remind them. Who are you? Batman. Good guys wear black.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 232 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal. With me, my good friend, good brother, the man responsible pretty much, because he's the one who posted the poll on Twitter for this week's episode. That's right, it's Liam. Liam, we've been taking a look back at some of the classic Batman the Animated Series episodes we've covered on some of the original episodes of the pod nearly 5 years ago. We've had some great special guest correspondence this week as we've had each member of the Watchtower database join us to take a second look at some of these episodes that we covered very early on and check back, see how we feel about our scores, get their thoughts on the scores. But this week, it's just you and me. It's just you and me and our collective thoughts on an episode decided by the listeners in what I can only explain as a cruel joke from the people that listen to our program.
Yeah, I'm not happy about any of this. I thought I gave a wide variety of choices, including I was hoping to split the vote between this and Fear of Victory, but it didn't work. And I was hoping that one of the other less terrible choices would win. But here we are taking a second look at the Underdwellers.
That's right. We got trolled into a re-review of what was notoriously known initially. Our bad episode jar that we would put $1 in every time we mentioned it was originally called the Underdwellers jar because it was the OG. It was the original terrible episode that we reviewed, one that was legendarily bad. We reviewed it way back on episode 6 of the podcast. It was actually a double feature. We reviewed this and the actually complete mirror opposite of this episode, POV, a fond episode that was ended up being pretty good. But yep, this one is memorable for a lot of bad reasons, unfortunately, and I guess we will get into that today as we settle in for a re-review of this episode that originally aired nearly 30, actually just about 30 years to the date that this episode of this podcast is being dropped. 30 years and 1 day. That's right, on October the 21st. 1992, this episode originally aired here in the States on Fox Kids. Liam, before we get into our re-review, checking in on some of the scores that we originally gave this and seeing if we agree or if we're going to give them lower or higher scores. Spoiler alert, I doubt that any of these scores are going to come in any higher, but I could be wrong. But we're, of course, going to get the official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode, which is, of course, is brought to you by The Pod Tower. Check out youtube.com/The Pod Tower for our original review of this episode, as well as our entire back catalog of episodes from every series in the DCAU, plus some amazing content from other DCAU content creators.
That's right. So this is the synopsis for The Underdwellers, which was written. There are 3 people came up with this story. We have the story by Tom Ruger with teleplay by Jules Dennis and Richard Muller, directed by Frank Parr, music by Stuart Balcom and Lars Clutterum, and animation by Studio Junio or Junio. Never known how to pronounce that. But that synopsis reads as such. Batman discovers a subterranean colony of children in the sewer system dominated by the insane sewer king.
I think the IMDb synopsis is going to be the best thing about this episode.
Could be.
Well, we should get into the plot here, Liam, as we opened up. We have a weird sort of cold opening here, and a sequence that has nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the episode. It's very bizarre, as Batman witnesses 2 young teenagers playing the game of chicken, riding on a sky train going through the or subway, I don't know, it's one of those things, going through Gotham, and they are playing chicken. Who's going to jump off first? The first young man, who's clearly the smarter of the 2, jumps off, and much to the dismay and is being berated by his pal, who's calling him a chicken, who looks down and, wouldn't you know it, manages to have gotten his foot wedged between a bunch of hoses or cables or something that are sitting on the roof.
Tales all this time.
Yep. It always happens that way. Wouldn't you know it? And just before he's about to be decapitated, which honestly would have been justice for this young man, Batman swings in and manages to remove him from and save him from danger at the very last second, sparing his life, much to my chagrin.
Whoever jumps first is chicken. I knew you'd chicken out.
You play chicken long enough, you fry.
And gives us the first of 2 PSAs for our episode. This one a little less overt, reminding these teens that, hey, if you're not careful and you play chicken too long, you might end up fried, which is, of course, a pun. So we then cut across town, where we see an older lady who is waiting on the sidewalk. It reminded me of the same character model from Christmas with the Joker, who's the lady who gets stolen. This lady's always dropped her purse or whatever it is. So this lady's just hapless when it comes to carrying things and retaining her valuables. So she's standing there on the corner, and a diminutive person in a green hood runs through, snatches her purse, runs away through the traffic, and as she recounts the tale to a police officer, she tells him that it was in fact a leprechaun that stole her purse. And the police officer, of course, not having any of this, shakes his head and can't believe it. And just as he says that, Batman runs past and jumps over a bunch of cars, seemingly trying to chase down said leprechaun. So Batman has a brief interaction where he may or may not have seen the leprechaun, and the leprechaun escapes someplace out of sight, foiling Batman. And Batman is left sort of shaking his head as we return to the Batcave, as Batman and Alfred, who truly is the star of this week's episode, in my opinion, is sitting at the Bat computer, listening to some very loud orchestral music as Batman sort of is pondering just what he witnessed Alfred doing his best to continue to chide him about the idea that he saw a leprechaun, that perhaps he advises that Bruce perhaps needs a vacation, has been working too hard. Bruce has no interest in doing this and decides that he's going to set back out to see just what he can discover when it comes to this reported sightings of leprechauns as he heads back downtown.
Leprechauns, Alfred.
Pardon? Not in the mood for Brahms, are we?
You think I'm crazy, don't you?
In what sense, Master Bruce?
Seriously. You don't believe I saw a leprechaun.
Did he have a pot of gold? Sir, I believe you saw something.
Maybe I need a rest.
I do believe a break from Wayne Enterprises and crime fighting would do wonders. Perhaps a vacation, a bit of golf.
Sounds boring.
In the Bahamas?
Hot and boring. No, Alfred. I think this is a job for Batman.
You have a fine flair for the dramatic, sir.
Why, thank you, Alfred.
The theater district?
Yes. I think it's time for an encore.
It's where we get our first look at the aforementioned Sewer King, and we find out a little bit about this strange little underground society of underground children here. And
it's like a gang of these ragamuffin children. They have like ratty clothes, and they're like walking in single file and doing various underground work tasks, you know, those things like gardening. All the staples of working underground, right?
That's right. So we see these kids, and they're farming, and one accidentally sort of injures themselves and calls out, which we quickly establish is a no-no, as the kids are summoned by the Sewer King, who we see for the first time here, who is very clear to make a point about how the children are not allowed to speak, and children are meant to be seen, not heard, and he's the only one that cares for them, and all this stuff. Just grade A abusive evil caretaker out of a like a Charles Dickens novel or something. As he just goes on ranting and raving, and decides he wants to send all of the children out to collect him various shiny trinkets.
Hurry up! Hurry, 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 hurry! Are you ready for your lessons? Yes? I think so. I think so. Well, so am I. Your teacher, your leader, your king. Ready? I am. Yes. Lesson number 1 is no talking! Children are to be seen and not heard. We are the Underdwellers. We are the silent ones. We follow the invisible creed. But, someone was talking. You were heard. And we all know the punishment for talking. Don't we, boys and girls? I think he needs to see the light. Yes, I do. A few hours in the light will make Jack a bright boy. And now, lesson 2. All of you up to the streets! Bring back pretties. Lots and lots of pretties for your king. Now!
We really just established this guy's just out of his mind, and he's quite abusive and really rules with an iron fist here. So we see the kids kind of take back out to the streets, at which point Batman is kind of hot on the trail of one of them, and we get the return. We just talked about this a few weeks ago when we took a second look at On Leather Wings. It's the return of the magic detective goggles from On Leather Wings, as it's clear here that there's some sort of hidden passageways or something at the the kids are using to evade Batman and the police. And wouldn't you know it, Batman finds a false wall going to one of these buildings, and he's kind of hot on the trail from there. And he sort of chases down one of these kids who's just sort of a step ahead of him the whole time, as Batman's sort of trying to get the lay of the land. He keeps seeing various graffiti telling him to beware the sewer king and all of this. So he's sort of learning a little bit about our villain. And finally he comes across this kid, and it looks like the kid has evaded him, but then tries to go when the kid tries to leave and go back out the exits that he came in, Batman is of course there waiting for him, and takes him back to Wayne Manor, because it's never a bad idea if you're Batman to just stockpile a few extra orphans around you. You never know when you're going to need another one.
That's right. He's always losing them, so you got to have it. As I believe Harley Quinn and Joker point that out in Batman Beyond Return of the Joker. He's always got an extra kid around her too. So, it's just a plot device to put Alfred in a wacky situation that leads to Bruce leaving him, this child, in Alfred's care. Alfred begins to attempt to get him to get cleaned up and to feed him. He talks to him, but the child doesn't respond in any way. We learn actually in the very next scene, the child's name is Frog.
Frog, the rolls, if you please. You're not Frog. Where is he? He's not here. Not here! And after all I've done for you ungrateful little monsters, I took you in when nobody else would have you. It is I who care for you. I who provide for you. And only I who knows what's good for you. Would you rather I sent you back into the light? Back to those who hurt you and sent you away? There will be nothing to eat until Frog is found. Now out with you! Out with you!
Yep, that's right. The child's name is Frog. Perfectly normal name for a child. So Frog is mute, or at least refuses to speak. And we get some homages to, I think, Risky Business, as he puts some sunglasses on, and there's some chicanery that happens as Alfred begins to try to make him into a respectable young man. And he keeps stealing silverware and shoving it into his shirts, and stealing the platter as Alfred attempts to have him help him wash the dishes, and then uses said platter to slide down the giant staircase in Wayne Manor. By the way, Batman hides this kid's view from getting into the Bat Cave, but then proceeds to have him run around Wayne Manor with Bruce Wayne's very public butler. But okay, all right, makes a lot of sense. Story doesn't have to make a lot of sense, I guess. Yes, Batman, by the way, is sitting in the Bat Cave at this point, observing, amused at watching Alfred having all of this trouble. So then Batman has Frog. Yep, that's right, Frog. As Batman is watching, we get our second PSA of the episode. That's where Frog runs into Bruce's trophy/weapons room. One of those that you have. He has a giant weapons room, and of course, the weapons room happens to have a bunch of hunting rifles and guns, it appears. And he grabs one of them and points it. Frog grabs one of the guns and points it at Alfred. And that's when Batman runs in and stops him at the last second. And we get our famous line of, "Children and guns do not mix, ever."
Oh dear, that is extremely dangerous. You must put it down before you hurt someone.
Children and guns do not mix, ever. It wasn't loaded, but it could have been. I need your help.
It could have been loaded. Thankfully, it wasn't. Ugh.
Yeah, you're just waiting for the GI Joe theme to kick in. Like
Yeah.
it's so on the nose, and sort of something we again have talked about this much, which is how quite often the creators of the show tried not to talk down to their audience, even though they knew the audience was going to be primarily made of children. But here we are with our second PSA of the episode.
Yeah, and some of that may have had to do with who was responsible for like the director and all that stuff. We'll talk about that when we get to animation and stuff. But there's some DNA from those children's 80s cartoons in a lot of this episode. Is again, we remember that this was a show that was written for children. This is a very childlike episode, very, very childish episode, which lends it to not feel quite like the DNA of the Batman the Animated Series we know and love, which was a show that was able to be appreciated by people of all ages. But after we get our PSA, we do get Frog taking Batman down to the sewers, and Batman gets down there and he witnesses the amount of children. We see Batman taking pictures for evidence, and my question was, is he turning these over to the police? Is that why he's taking the pictures of the kids? I
certainly hope so.
Right. Well, I shouldn't have asked that question based on the subject matter that this episode sort of dances around. But what, like, I don't know. We don't really see a lot of Batman building cases and turning evidence over to the police a whole lot. You usually see him just like getting the bad guy and turning him over to the police and allowing them to do their own detective work. So that was a very odd moment here where Batman just takes pictures of these starved children that haven't seen the sunlight in a very long time. But sure, let's just keep going, I guess. Well, after he does that, he decides to enter the main area where the children all gather, and there's this bell that the Sewer King rings in order to gather all of them, and he uses this opportunity to both ring and destroy said bell in order to sort of begin the end of the Sewer King's reign in the sewers. But unfortunately, the Sewer King won't go down that easily.
That's right, because all of a sudden he's got alligators.
Yep.
You just got a bunch, and that's
big ones. That's huge.
Yeah, it's like a varying size. Sometimes the same one looks like a different size. We'll get to that in animation. But yeah, no, that's basically our final. That's the end of Act 2. Is the Sewer King walks into frame with two pet alligators by his side, and then Act 3 is mostly Batman fighting these alligators. He takes care of a few of them, and the Sewer King begins to run away, and Batman follows, and it's clear that Batman's a little bit outmatched because the Sewer King is more familiar with the terrain of these sewer systems. But ultimately, it comes down to the Sewer King just books it. And Batman's able to kind of avoid all of the remaining gators and tracks them down. They end up on the subway tracks underground in Gotham City. And right as a train comes, Batman is seemingly has a moment where he could let the Sewer King he could do the Liam Neeson and Batman Begins thing and just let him go, but he pulls him off the tracks and tells him that even though he doesn't want to, he's going to let the courts decide the Sewer King's fate.
Why? I don't pass sentence. That's for the courts. But this time, I am sorely tempted to do the job myself.
And then we go to our happy ending as all of we see all the children being helped out of the sewer by police officers and social workers and such, and
random human beings.
Yeah, just a lot of people just gathered around this one sewer grate where I guess all of the kids are funneling out of, and we see Batman standing off on a nearby rooftop and kind of just looking solemnly, and that's how we end our episode.
Yep. did you mention the part where Batman ripped open one of the alligator's jaws?
He does. Yeah, he does kill this alligator.
Yeah, doing something that's physically impossible by forcing this alligator's jaws wide open. But
yeah, that's a real production inconsistency.
Yeah, the DCAU wiki is filled with just absolute gold. You know,
just if you are a mod on the DCAU wiki, just contact me, please. I want to talk to you. I want to learn from you. Right?
We can have you on as a guest in a bonus episode just to discuss what gets approved and how the DCAU wiki works. Because
I just want to know what you think a production. What do you think those words mean when you say production and consistency, or trivia for that matter? What do you think those words mean? I just like to talk to you about it. So please DM us or add us at DCAU Review on Instagram or Twitter. I desperately need to make contact with you.
Please and thank you. All right. So Liam, originally for this episode, you and I had the identical score of 3 out of 10 for this. And as we consider our original scores here, I feel like that's a little bit too high. I hate this episode. This episode is so bad. It doesn't feel like it belongs in this universe. It doesn't feel like it belongs in the show. It is so early on in production for this show that it sort of gets a pass, because as we've discovered and discussed and rediscussed as we've been taking a look back at some of these early episodes, it seems like they had some writers that weren't quite sure about the tone. You didn't have Alan Burnett on the staff quite yet, guiding and kind of giving the darker Batman stories, the stories that could be enjoyed by adults and children. You had, it seems like this one, you had three different people responsible for this one too. So again, you have a mixing of ideas and tones, and it ends up being a bit of a mess because of that. And I believe Mr. Parr, who directed this, did some work for, I saw Real Ghostbusters and maybe G.I. Joe also in the 80s. So there is a lot of DNA, and we'll talk about it in visuals in just a moment, but there's a lot of that DNA in the just how this episode feels. It feels like it is a random 80s movie, children's movie, or B animated show involving children, where children have to be the stars, and there's, stories that would somewhat get children's attention because the children are involved. And it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense that a human adult male has an army of sewer children that he's just accumulated from somewhere. We get some sort of dialogue where he says that these were kids that no one wanted, but there's like 35 kids down there. You mean to tell me that he's accumulated 35 children to do this like indescript work of underground gardening and collecting stuff, and none of them have ever been caught? None of them have ever decided they don't want this anymore or to do this anymore. No one has ever stumbled. Is this something that just started like 3 days before Batman ends up blowing it up? Like, it doesn't seem like that. It seems like it's been going on for some time. So I don't know. It's a bizarre episode. We talked about it on the very first time that we did this. It's uncomfortable because of the overtones and undertones of what the Sewer King is, or who he is, or what he's doing with these children. I hate this episode, and every time I have to watch it is just another 22 minutes of my life that I will never get back and regret seeing this. So I think I would, if given the choice, I would downgrade my score probably to a 1 or a 0.
Yeah, it's just really it's not fun. Like, there's some wackier, sillier episodes. I mean, we just talked about The Last Laugh a couple of weeks ago with Ted from Watchtower Database, and we had a blast. Like, all three of us had a blast revisiting that one. So it's not as if, oh, it's just because it's these earlier episodes, or just because, we don't like a sillier plot or something like that. Or, some of our favorite episodes don't even involve, I don't know when we talked about that one, but like Cape and Cow Conspiracy, or It's Never Too Late, or some of these episodes that don't feature like a big name supervillain are some really, really fun episodes. So it's not that. It's just, yeah, it's not very pleasant. There is an undertone, especially in Batman's sort of visceral reaction to this, that feels like maybe they're implying something else about Stewart King's treatment of these children. And yeah, it's really, really unpleasant. You had a note that there's probably some, because this sort of takes from the classic tale of Oliver Twist, there's probably some DNA of that with, children who become pickpockets for this, kind of shady character. But yeah, so it doesn't feel, it feels like, I can understand why, if you're Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski and Gene McCurdy, and this is the early days of the show, and you get elevator pitched this plot, you're like, yeah, maybe we can make this work. Like, it's this weird guy and he's in the sewers and he has a child army and they're stealing things for him, and then like, ducking back into the sewers. It's like, yeah, like I can see why this could work for a Batman story, because he kind of feels like he shares DNA with like Sherlock Holmes and a lot of those types of literary characters, and this is kind of a strange little plot. Like, I could see why you would think this could work for a Batman story, but just, yeah, execution, it's not fun. It's unpleasant to watch. You get the brief joy of the Alfred and Frog antics in Wayne Manor, which is all of maybe 2 minutes of the episode. So yeah, it's tough. It's a tough watch. It's not very, we'll talk about animation and voice acting. I don't think any of our categories don't lift this up either, where maybe some of this stuff would be more forgivable. But yeah, I just didn't enjoy it. Like, that's the bare minimum I could say about this. Like, I can, like, it, if you go the elevator pitch of the crazy Stewart King, and the end of the episode is going to be Batman fighting alligators. I don't know how that could not be good, but we figured out a way.
Well, right. And part of me wonders if this is sort of a result of when this story was written. And you think about over the last 30 years, how much, I would say, hopefully as a society, we're a little bit more sensitive to the idea of the vulnerability of children, and putting children in these situations, and how that stands out as like, whoa, this doesn't feel right. Like, this feels just kind of like gross. I like, this isn't normal, and it shouldn't be normal, and we shouldn't normalize this. Like, if you watch a lot of 80s movies, or any movies involve like kids movies from the 80s, they're filled with these weird things where kids are put in situations where nowadays people would be like, what in the world was this writer thinking by putting this storyline in a children's movie, or involving a child in this type of storyline? Whereas now, back then it was just like, it's kids and we're making stuff for kids, so sure, this is fine. No one will think twice about this. Do you think that may have something to do with it, if we're trying to be quote unquote fair to this episode?
Yeah, I could see there being some DNA of some of these, like a Stand By Me, or some of these things where kids are getting, where like the teen bullies are like pulling knives on little kids and stuff, like just some, wacky stuff that happened in that era of film. So yeah, maybe there's some DNA of that in it too. But it's one of those things where it just doesn't come together in an enjoyable way for me. Like the tonal shift between kind of how over the top the villain is, again, we'll probably talk about this in voice acting, but compared to sort of how straight and quite frankly like horrified Batman is by this situation. Like, it doesn't feel like those two characters, like if this Sewer King was interacting with like the Super Friends Batman or something, it feels like it would fit better. But because he's dealing with this Batman, and Batman is reacting so kind of violently towards what he's seeing, it doesn't. Yeah, there's some tonal problems, I think, to it, and yeah, just like you said, maybe just overall subject matter that's a little strange, or not a fun thing to visit, and certainly not a fun thing to revisit as we are here on this week. So yeah, three, maybe I would go a 2 or a 1 myself here. So this is pretty low as far as episodes of the show that we've that we've watched. And like you said, this was the original one that kind of set up our long running bad episode jar joke. But and while it has been usurped, it's certainly no longer our lowest scored episode. It still deserves it's still on the Mount Rushmore of terrible DCAU episodes, just maybe because, if for no other reason, then it was the first truly terrible episode that I think they produced.
Agreed. And it's interesting that just a couple of episodes later, you have basically what amounts to an adult version of a very similar storyline with the Forgotten, where there's an evil man that has his own army of people doing slave labor for him, essentially. That's going around, and there's a mystery, and Batman has to figure out what's going on with that and free this army of homeless people that this guy has been kidnapping. So you have an episode that later on, at least just a couple episodes later, is done a little bit, is executed a little bit better than this, and you can tell a story that has some of that intrigue and that idea of a person taking advantage of people, that doesn't put children in an awkward situation that makes you just feel kind of gross watching.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's move on to the animation and visuals. Who was the fine animation team that worked on this week's episode, Liam?
So we have a studio. I don't know if it's Junio or Junio, but it's they only did a few episodes of the original series here. Other episodes that we've already talked about would be, of course, this one. We have Dreams in Darkness, Mudslide, and Blind as a Bat. They were also responsible for. It's interesting because I don't think Batman himself is pretty on model and pretty consistent for the episode, but there's something just kind of off about it, and I feel like it's in the actual there's like a lack of fluidity in a lot of the movement. So it actually comes down to less character designs, or less the that sort of thing, and I think more down to just the episode itself is a little stiff and a little I don't know, visually uninteresting for the most part.
Yeah, I would also say that everything about this episode, again, we talked about the DNA of the story feeling like something out of the 80s, an 80s cartoon, an 80s children's cartoon, which Bruce Timm was vehemently against that, which is why he went with a different style, and the squared off jaws, and the barrel chests and everything, and the more Jack Kirby looking style of animation. He wanted it to look different than what had been on television the prior decade. And so much of this episode looks like animation from the 80s. It looks like real Ghostbusters or G.I. Joe, or it's just the character designs. It looks just like a bad 80s cartoon. It's one of the few episodes that I forget the story itself, but I would be reluctant to show somebody and say, man, look at this great animation, because it looks very dated. Like, it just does not look good. It looks like the characters from like the Burger King Kids Club from like the mid 90s. Like, all the characters look like these, which is fine, like Captain Planet or like any of those other early 90s, late 80s cartoons, Inspector Gadget, like all those goofy looking cartoons that had their own look. and they worked fine for the time or what those cartoons, but Batman was supposed to be different, was different for the majority, which set it apart. And this one sort of fades back into that look. I will say Sewer King, I guess I picked up on the fact that Batman went to the theater district. Maybe he's like Sewer King is like a retired actor or something, which is why he's wearing a full pirate getup. He's in full pirate gear, a cape and the puffy shirt and the pirate boots and the eye patch. So maybe he's a retired actor of some kind. But yeah, there's not much explanation for that. I will say that the crocodiles were giving me like Ninja Turtles vibes at times. They were very inconsistent looking, very goofy looking at times, and yeah, it visually uninteresting. I think is fair to say. We don't really have a whole lot of action because it's an episode where Batman is chasing. The scene where he has to chase Frog through the sewers initially is kind of setting you up for, okay, this might be interesting. Ends up not being very interesting. Alfred and Frog's chicanery happening in the mansion is a little bit funny, but there's not much interesting in the way of that. I'd say the only thing that I remember from this episode, and I think is pretty awesome, is the fact when Batman rips the bell down and then he uses that bell to smash one of the crocodiles in the face. He like whips the bell across this crocodile's face. So and then uses the rope to like hog tie it, which again, I don't think that that's physically possible to do based on the like how an alligator's hands and feet work. But sure, that's fine. Sure, it's fine. So
it's not the most ridiculous thing about this episode.
True, absolutely. But yeah, the rest of it, you know, we get a good Batman thumbs up gif out of this episode. As he gives Frog a thumbs up and Frog gives him a thumbs up. But yeah, other than that, there is truly very little to talk about when it comes to the animation for this week. Was there anything that was noteworthy to you?
Yeah, I mean, I will say the Sewer King design I do kind of like it's weird and it's very over the top. I feel like again, yeah, maybe, and again, this goes back more to plot maybe, but we could have, because we had the time clearly, based on how kind of thin the plot is, where we could have gotten like a Sewer King origin, like maybe he himself was an orphan or something, and we find out, we maybe try to make him a little bit sympathetic or something. But yeah, I would have liked to have learned a little bit more about him. But yeah, I think the design is all right. There's a bit where he's like chomping on, he's eating like a 5-course meal and yelling at the kids and everything, and you see like spit flying out of his mouth and then all of this stuff. Like it's a little more detailed than you might expect again for these cartoons, which usually kept things pretty basic in that department as far as like lines in his face and everything like that.
You get a lot of teeth lines in this episode.
For sure,
including Batman.
So I like that design. The design of Frog when he's and I think a couple of the other kids, when they all have these like green hoods, or a couple of them have these green hoods that they're wearing, which seemed to me to be, and they all have like brown hair. It seemed to be reminiscent of the hobbits from the 1970s Lord of the Rings movies.
Oh man, that's a throwback.
Yes. Which I'm sure if you saw those at the right age, that probably has a real special place in your heart. But
sure.
But yeah, that was kind of the only other like visual homage I plucked out of the episode. The final act where Batman, he as mentioned, he ties one alligator up, he snaps the other one's jaw, and then he's kind of wrestling with one of the two of the other ones. Like there's kind of some fun there, but I think the bit where he's kind of sleuthing around looking, he's kind of skulking through the the subways and the sewers, and he's looking up at the graffiti. I think the background designs and everything are pretty good. So
Agreed.
I'll try to find I'll try to find a few positives to throw in there with what I've already said about the animation itself being a little stiff and the action of the episode not being particularly interesting. But yeah, so I think almost by default, animation might be the strongest of our 4 categories here for me. But
well, you originally gave it a 5, which was tied for with another score. So it was sort of tied for the highest score that you gave it originally. Mm-hmm. So it seems like that you're trending towards keeping that, or would you move the needle one way or the other?
Yeah, I'd probably keep it at a 5. I think I think the whole sequence, there is a lot of bits where we get very little shadow and very little shade work, which really makes it, as you said, kind of look like a G.I. Joe cartoon or something like that. Mm-hmm. The opening, the 2, I think they're supposed to be teenagers, but the 2 kids that Batman saves,
the one kid with male pattern baldness,
yes,
as the Jordan,
yes, apparently an epidemic,
yeah,
an epidemic in Gotham City at this point for the youth of Gotham City. The one kid has no eyebrows and has like a Cro-Magnon forehead, and the other one has already has a receding hairline. So yeah, I thought that sequence is very kind of wacky and strange as well. So, but the way, like, they have like a couple of POV shots that the kids are kind of watching, and you see the train swooping, and you see the cables sort of getting electrified, and you see them heading towards the tunnel. So there's a couple of silver linings in this dark cloud. So yeah, I think I would probably sit at my 5 where I was originally for this. It's fine.
I gave it a 3 originally, which there is a lot of unfavorable animation, and I'm not a fan of the way that things look based on the comments that I made before. I will say that the sequences with Frog hiding the silverware in his shirt and then running away and the silverware falling out was amusing. The whole Alfred thing is great too. I had forgotten him sort of openly dancing in that opening scene as he's listening to the orchestral music as he's sort of chastising Batman for thinking he saw a leprechaun. So I did enjoy it. Alfred's the best part of this, and his scenes of chasing young Frog around are certainly amusing. And I would second, as Batman is sort of walking through the sewers and sort of stumbling upon that graffiti that you mentioned, and all of that is certainly an interesting visual as we kind of see him tracking down just exactly what is going on and trying to put the pieces together. But yeah, it's distracting at times, and you wish for an episode where the story wasn't so great, where the plot wasn't really great, that you had a little bit more action to sort of pick up that. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of great action sequences that were animated or things that you can point to and say, yeah, that looked really cool here. So my original score was a 3 out of 10, and I'd probably keep it around there, maybe bump it up to a 4 if I was feeling kind that day. But yeah, it would probably hang around that 3 mark for me as well. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which of course is going to be music. And so interestingly, I think this would probably get most improved for me. I originally gave music a 3 out of 10. That seems like a reaction based on disliking the entire episode. if I had to wager a guess there, because there is actually some interesting music. The music as Batman is doing the investigation in the sewers, and where we get the Sewer King first introduced, are both very, I think, interesting and memorable, and sort of bring up the tension for those scenes, kind of play up the moments there. So I would say that there's the end scene where the children are all being brought out of the sewer, and there's a cut up to a very strange looking Batman, by the way. I didn't mention it, but he was very off model in that last shot. But there's some Batman. It's sort of the Shirley Walker Batman, but not quite. It's just kind of, it hits 1 or 2 of the notes and then kind of goes in a different direction. So it was, as we mentioned a couple of weeks ago when we were when we were talking. Who were we talking about the music kind of going in different directions? Was that with Ted? No.
Well, we definitely talked a lot about the music in Last Laugh, but I think we were talking about the with James about
that's right,
it being earlier in the show, and then
yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it sort of went in a different direction than you were probably used to, as opposed to playing the Shirley Walker Batman theme just straight out and ending the episode, or even infusing another piece, or one of the episode's main pieces. It just sort of kind of goes in a different turn. So I think I appreciated the music a little bit more in this episode and this rewatch, because I was looking for anything to hold on to. So I think some of the action sequences, I love that right before Batman whacks the alligator in the face with the bell, you get like a church bell lead up to it in the music, and then he smashes the bell into the face of the animal. So that was a note that I notated there. And then of course some of the music playing early on as Frog steals the purse and Batman is sort of chasing him throughout the sewers later on. There was some musical moments there as the train nearly hits the both of them. So I originally gave music a 3 out of 10, as I mentioned, and I would probably bump it up to a 5 if I had the chance again. I think this we definitely talked about with Ted is, the music wasn't bad, it wasn't offensive, and it didn't take away from the episode. In fact, there was probably a couple of parts that it may have added to the scene. So I think a 5 out of 10 would probably be what I would give this, given a re-review. You originally gave a 4 out of 10 for the music. Where did you fall for on a rewatch?
Yeah, I think I'd bump it up to a 5 or a 6 here. I think it was one thing that I genuinely didn't remember is that there is a little bit of a Sewer King theme. Like when he, from the first time he appears, when he summons the children with the bell, to when he's sitting there with the eating and demanding that all of the children go find Frog when he doesn't come back, and all of that. There's kind of it's not like a hummable one the way a Joker theme or a Riddler theme or something would grab you, but there is kind of a musical accompaniment to a lot of his moments, and especially in the first half of the episode. And yeah, I think it does a good job of maybe building a little bit of the menace of the character, even if other aspects of our plot, or as we'll talk about in a second, of the voice acting maybe lets that menace down. I think the Sewer King theme and some of that accompanying music is pretty good, and I would kind of concur with a lot of your thoughts as far as the rest of the music goes.
All right, well, let's wrap this baby up and get out of here. We've spent far too long for a second time talking about this episode, so we'll wrap it up with voice acting. So we have again early on here in the show, not a huge cast, because we have not a lot of characters featured in this episode. It's a pretty minute cast, and some characters playing secondary voices also. I originally gave voice acting a 5 out of 10. You gave it a 5 out of 10. Liam, let's talk about this week's voice cast.
Yeah, it's a tiny one. There's only 4 credited actors in the whole thing. I'm not sure exactly who provides the voice of our children, either the 30-year-old teenagers on top of the subway at the beginning, or Frog's one line that he gets at the end of the episode. If that was, it sounded like an adult's voice that they had kind of messed with the pitch on a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if that was maybe Andrea Romano herself or one of our other cast, but there is one other woman in the cast, Victoria Carroll, who I believe plays the woman who gets her purse stolen at one point. But really, yeah, we have Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. as Alfred, and I think he also plays one of the cops who tells Batman that it was a leprechaun that robbed this lady, or it's talking to the lady that who informs the cop that a leprechaun has stolen her purse. And then yeah, we got our two main actors of the episode. We have Michael Pataki voicing the Sewer King. And I mean, he's a fairly fairly tenured actor. He's things, did a lot of TV and movies. Like he's in Rocky IV. He's in one of the Halloween movies, as well as a couple of TV shows like Cagney and Lacey, and I believe he was in a couple of Star Trek episodes, and also did some other voice acting work again. So he's accomplished as an actor, certainly, and I could certainly see him being good in in other things. But in this episode, again, it just really leans into the camp, the Saturday morning 1980s GI Joe villain that we've that we've kind of talked about all episode long. But I don't think he really fits with the tone of the show. But then the whole character doesn't really fit with the tone of the show, and I think he kind of clashes, like I said, because he's so over the top and wacky. When you see the visceral reaction, or hear the visceral reaction in Batman and Kevin Conroy's voice as Batman in this episode, and the implications thereof of what this means that perhaps the Sewer King is doing to these children, it really doesn't feel like it fits at that point.
Yeah, agreed. I think in isolation, not knowing, if you're just going to look at the performance, I think it's a fine performance. I think for if you begin to pair it with who the character is, yeah, it's a little bit worse. And then if you begin to look at this character in this show, yeah, it's another mismatch. So I think the performance is likely what was asked of him, and it's not bad. It's not distracting. It actually seems to fit the character pretty well. He seems like a ruthless, terrible person. It comes across that way, at least. So for that reason, I'd say, yes, a great performance. I don't like this character, though, and I don't like the character's motives or what the character does or what it's insinuated. That I don't like the character. The performance, I think, is absolutely fine and bordering on good, I would say, for what they're asking for. If this character was just a villain and there weren't children involved in his schemes, you might just say, yeah, it's kind of just like a classic Saturday morning cartoon villain, like you said. But yeah, because of everything else, it's a little bit more unpleasant. So it's a fine performance, though.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm sure he did what was asked of him, and it's not his fault. I just say I don't think that we talked about this a lot, how a lot of the chemistry and a lot of the great voice acting performances in this show came from the fact that the actors were able to kind of bounce off of each other and sort of record their lines together. And in this case, I just feel like there's a little bit of a clash, of a styles clash, if you will, between what the subject of the episode is and Kevin Conroy's performance, and then Mr. Pataki's performance as our villain just doesn't kind of come together for me. But it's neither man is doing a bad job in a vacuum here, but together I don't think it's like peanut butter and fish. Like it just doesn't neither one is bad on its own. Don't want to eat them together, though.
Precisely. I agree with that. So I would say Ephraim Zimbalist is pretty strong in the role that they asked him to do. He has some funny lines. I love the line that he asks Batman after Batman continues to sort of stick to this story that there was a leprechaun. He continues to sort of playfully chide him as he says, "Did he have a pot of gold?" And then he's like, as he's like dancing to this classical music soundtrack that he's blaring through the Bat computer. So that whole bit was hilarious. He's a one-man show because he's playing off a character that is mute also. So as he's trying to learn Frog's name, he's asking him, he's spitting out random names for him, which I thought was quite amusing also. So yeah, there's some good Ephraim Zemblist here. And then Kevin Conroy, I guess, is the last voice to talk about, right? And he unfortunately, as he did in as we mentioned in the last laugh, falls victim to some really bad lines written for him. But he delivers them with all seriousness and gusto and does so really, really well. It's just he falls victim to some really unfortunate dialogue this week, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we've already kind of touched on the PSA lines that he's sort of forced to deliver to the various the children that are causing trouble in this episode. But then yes, he also has he does a little quip. He does a little like Sylvester Stallone action movie one-liner when he gets away from the alligators at the end. He turns back and to no one in particular goes later.
Well, he had to fall short of saying later gator, right?
Right.
That's what you expect him to say.
Right. So it's but I just like the idea that he's like, this, I will never have another opportunity to do this. So I have to hit this line. Because he appreciates a one-liner here, and an 80s action star one-liner here as he escapes the alligators. So yes, and then as mentioned, there's a little bit of back and forth with him and with Ephraim Zemblist that I think is funny when Batman's basically just like, all right, the kid's your problem now, and Alfred is kind of protesting and saying he doesn't know anything about children.
Good evening, Alfred.
Sir? Might this wee one be a leprechaun?
This, Alfred, is our guest. I'd like you to take care of him.
Me? But I know nothing of children.
You'll do fine. Feed him, clean him, and put him to bed.
Well, perhaps. Not in that order.
Which is funny in a in a strange way, because he's raised I don't know, he's raised at least two, but I guess he's still protesting, and Batman just kind of looks at him and goes, whatever, feed it, put it, clean it, put it to bed, like he's talking about a cat or something. But there's some kind of quirkier moments in the episode, and then as mentioned, he has this really sort of dramatic turn as he comes back to the hideout at the end of the episode. But like I said, I don't think he does a bad job. I just think it doesn't necessarily fit the wackiness of the villain of the piece.
Yeah, I agree. Yep. So as I mentioned, our original scores that we gave for this episode, you gave a 5. I also gave a 5. So I think I would probably stick to that. I might take it a tick lower, a 4, just because there's not anything that dynamic that stands out other than Alfred. So, but I guess I would probably stick to a 5. What about you?
Yeah, 4 or 5. I think I'd probably be in that same ballpark. Like I said, I don't think anybody on their own is bad in the episode. I think it's just, like I said, the story of it and where the characters had to go for the story to flesh out. I just don't think is as particularly good, and I don't think particularly comes all together. But again, that's no fault of the individual actors. So I think you could settle on probably anywhere between like a 4 and a 6 to me, and I think that would be just fine.
There we go. All right. So original scores 15 out of 40 and 16 out of 40. We, based on our re-review here, we would probably be a little bit lower on the scoreboard here overall. So I think it seems like an act not truly needed here, or a discussion truly not needed. But rewatchability, Liam, since we do this, my take on this is burn it at the stake. Remove it from all human history. If this episode didn't exist, I wouldn't miss it one bit. It needs to go away. These characters don't show up again. Doesn't play anything into the DCAU ever, and the DCAU is worse off for this episode existing. I guess the argument could be made since he's since made appearance or two in mainstream comics that that you could argue that the Sewer King is a relevant Batman villain, but that seems like a troll's argument to me. So I'm going to say never again.
Yeah, I mean the character makes no further appearances in the series, so doesn't even really show up in much supplementary material, save for a background appearance in the crossover between the Batman Adventures and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that came out a few years ago, and a appearance in the main comic line in the first issue of Tom King and Clay Mann's Batman and Catwoman series, where we do in fact learn that all of his crocodiles or alligators have rhyming names, which does make me like him a little bit better. But yes, thankfully this character, as far as the mainline DCAU goes, nothing more to report when it comes to this Sewer King or Frog or any of these other children that we see here. So yeah, we can go ahead and put this one in the bin. And just to make it clear, we're never talking about this episode again.
Blow it up. Yes, exactly. So to all of you that voted for us to review this episode, all I can say is I hope you're happy.
We look at how many people listen to these. This episode better perform at least more than like the Zeta Project reviews. All right, because if we did this and then nobody listens to it, that's even worse.
Agreed. 200%. All right, Liam. Well, that will begin to wrap this up this week, mercifully. Don't forget, we know that you follow us on Twitter at DCAU Review, especially if you voted for this episode to punish us. So make sure you then go ahead and follow us on Instagram at DCAU Review as well. Send us your scores and thoughts. We've had some very vocal trolls this week on Twitter that I loved laughing along with and seeing their encouraging comments as they drummed up a social media movement to make us review this episode. So that was pretty hilarious. At the end of the day, if it's going to be painful, at least make it funny too. And this was at least funny. So thank you for following us. Make sure you join the conversation. Tweet at DCAU Review. Let us know your thoughts on this. Leave a comment on our Instagram post as well with regards to this episode. Don't forget, of course, if you want to support the podcast, you can do so not only by following us on social media, subscribing to the podcast on your favorite podcast app, and leaving a review. A 5-star review helps us out a lot. And then if it allows you to leave a little blurb, you can do so as well. Don't forget, through Spotify, if you're listening there, we have some exclusive questions and polls each week for our episodes. Check that out. Vote in the polls. Send us some feedback based on our question of the week. Also, don't forget, if you want to support us monetarily, you can do so via the anchor.fm link that's posted at the bottom of the podcast, or you can head over to dcaureview.com, click on the store tab, and then pick yourself up a piece of merchandise. Don't forget, the holidays are coming, so get those stocking stuffers for you and your loved ones. All things DCAU Review. That's what your family really wants this holiday season. A Mr. Wing t-shirt. That's what they tell you. Liam, we are continuing next week, of course, with our 5th Saturday of the month, which is going to be an Elseworlds week, as we tend to do on the 5th Saturday of each month. And guess what? It's also it is officially spooky season. This week was a little scary, I'm not gonna lie. Reviewing one of the worst Batman the Animated Series episodes of all time was quite scary. But next week is truly spooky season, so we're gonna have a spooky episode to review next week for our Elseworlds tale.
That is right, Cal. we will be heading back to the world of Batman, the Brave, and the Bold, as we frequently do for our Elseworlds, which really just, I think, shows the mark of quality that show has, even though it's not part of the main DCAU. And as an appropriately spooky treat, we will be reviewing the episode Shadow of the Bat. No, not that one. This one involves Batman getting bitten by a vampire and perhaps feasting on not only his some of his direct allies, but also heading up to the Watchtower and seeing a take on the Justice League International team of the 90s in that show. So a very wacky and fun adventure awaits us next week as we review that episode of Brave and the Bold.
Can't wait. It's going to be a blast. But until then, I am Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Adios.